So,
Well, we saw too that when we were looking at what predicted. So the way we define political correctness, it's tricky when you're trying to study political behavior scientifically, because you really have to be careful that your biases don't enter into the research, and that's very, very difficult. But there are technical ways of solving that. So, for example, if you wanted to measure PC attitudes, the first thing you do is to try to make sure that your definition of what constitutes political correctness isn't your definition. So what we did was we used a number of people to lay out items that might be associated with political correctness, and we took them from news media accounts and all of that. And I think you collected 400 items to begin with, right? Questions that we thought might index political correctness. And then you can, if you give them to a very large number of people, those questions, you can start to see how the questions clump, if the questions clump together, and how they do. And clumping together would mean if you have question A and B, and everybody who says yes to question A also says yes to question B, and everyone who says no to question A also says no to question B, then you can more or less say that they're kind of assessing the same thing, right? And so a factor analysis will do that. And so Christine pulled out 2 factors from this huge clump of questions about political correctness, and that was the PC egalitarian types, who we probably don't have to worry about that much, and the PC authoritarians, and they weren't very much fun at all. I think we looked at, because I had made a scale a while back that quickly assessed personality disorder symptoms, and the personality disorder symptoms, did they predict both elements of political correctness? Yeah, both elements, yeah. So that was also part of it. So there is evidence that, and I see this at the universities, because a lot of what those goddamn corrupt cult-leading professors do is they take kids who have real serious psychiatric problems, and they exploit them. They put them in the little cult, and then they use them as minions. Like even at McMaster University, when I went there and that protest broke out. First, like a lot of the women in particular that were protesting, a lot of them were just causing trouble. They were just foolish girls. There were some really bad guys there, like some really dangerous people, and I've learned how to identify dangerous people. I don't see them very often, but there was 3 or 4 guys there that were seriously bad news. But a lot of them, I could tell, they had personality disorders. They weren't functioning well. And they're really easy to manipulate. The cult leaders do the same thing, So it's not that they're stupid. And the same thing happens in cults. It's like, it isn't kids who have low IQs that end up in cults. It's smart kids who are confused. So,
is the rise of these character traits something recent, or is it something that's been inherent, or what? What would you attribute it to that being to the fore?
Well, I think that it isn't always the case that every personality dimension has a political voice. We've been trying to figure out, so the basic, weirdly enough, so if you take the basic continuum of, say, left to right as the basic continuum for our political system, what happens is that on the left you have low conscientiousness and high openness, and on the right you have high conscientiousness and low openness. And one of the things we've been trying to figure out is, well, what the hell? Why did those 2 personality traits predict political belief when there's all these other personality traits that could? And one of the hypotheses we've been working on, I really like this, is that it has everything to do with borders. So like open people, they don't like borders much, because they think that if you keep things too separated, they get static, and new and interesting things don't happen. So creative people like to destroy borders and reorganize things. Whereas conscientious people think, no, you just keep the damn borders together because everything stays neat and organized. And so I think the reason that openness and conscientiousness clump together is because it has everything to do with borders. And then I think that politics has everything to do with borders. And if you think about it, it's not that radical a claim, because our basic political units are bordered entities, right? It's like we have Canada, it's within borders, and we have the US, but it's more. What's that? You think we're being ushered out? Yes?
Like, these personality traits describe left and right politics.
Yeah.
How often or how accurate is that? So would that be, say, 60% of the left falls into these categories?
Oh yes, it's plenty powerful enough to throw every election in the United States. Because the margins are so small. It's plenty powerful enough to throw the elections. The effect is very, very strong. So I had one student who's not here today, one of the things that, what the psychologists often do is look at voting preference or political party identification, especially in the US. But it turns out that you can get a much more differentiated view of someone's political belief by measuring it more with more accuracy than that. So imagine you have a 100-item question that determines whether you're a conservative or a liberal, instead of just voting. The amount that personality can account for of that 100-item question, that goes way the hell up. It's a huge determinant.
I was going to say, there was also a recent study that was done where they, so one of the things that it seems to be that personality is based on is they think it's like half temperament, which is purely biological, and then half environmental or cultural influences. And there was a study that was done where they were looking at a brain scan, and it was actually activity in the limbic system that was very different for conservatives versus people who voted for liberals, and that was able to predict which way they would vote with something like an 80% accuracy. So, yeah. I think
Another
also,
quick question, would you say, and I'm just kind of throwing this out there, like this new phenomenon of maybe not necessarily alt-right white nationalists, but more the Kekistani types, I kind of see these people as maybe more creative than their conservative counterparts, although they do share a lot of similarities. Is that
We don't know anything about them. I mean, there does seem to be a fair bit of emerging chaos in political identification, and I think that's especially true with these online groups. You know, because there's more right-wing radicalism. It's like, and you see this as well, that there's lots of right world that the right-wingers started to have all the comedians, you know, because what the hell, that's not how it's supposed to work. And so I think the political landscape is fracturing enough so that some of the classical distinctions aren't working properly anymore. And I think that's why things are playing out so strangely.
I was going to say, I think part of the reason why you're seeing that too, and like to link it back to the difference like between conscientiousness or orderliness and that openness kind of change that we see. A different way of thinking about it when you start looking at the biology is like conscientiousness, and same with compassion as well. Those are more like communion, group-oriented processes, and they seem to be somewhat linked to the vasopressin and oxytocin systems, which are the ones that you get from like exchanging social interactions that you have with other people. So it seems like before we were seeing like these really extreme kind of groups, things were more focused on like community orientation and like holding the ties together, and that's why like the family kind of center was seen there. Whereas now we're seeing like this off-spin of conservatism that's becoming more towards the low openness side as opposed to being the high conscientiousness thing, which is openness would be more like a narcissism, but like it's more the individual that you're thinking as the actor as opposed to orienting your actions based on the group and being concerned about maintaining a group. So openness is very much like people responding immediately to their environmental stimuli and how it emotionally affects them, and then being able to, change their orientation or act in a different way based on that. So if you're seeing openness being the biggest predictor right now of political belief, as opposed to things like conscientiousness, which is like let's maintain the group, or things like compassion and that, it's very much a bunch of teenagers basically who are not growing up and just running around and trying to create these different parties, and people just building into their ego, and instead we're a very fractured kind of society that's creating these groups on the extremes.
So folks, so sorry to interrupt. Our time here is up. The music is literally playing us out. Because this is actually rented out for something else pretty soon.
Okay.
So if we could say our goodbyes, eat something for God's sake. And thank you very much for coming, everybody.
Yes, thank you all very much.